and thereby reduce time and cost throughout the clinical trial process. A quality, robust CTMS essentially tracks each step of the clinical trial process from study startup to study closeout. It also serves as an essential repository of clinical trial management information such as investigators, sites, subject enrollment, site visits, payments, etc. With a single system, information such as investigator names and addresses only needs to be entered once, which saves time and reduces error. And with all of your clinical trial information in one place, it's much easier to extract it and use it to make informed decisions about the future or answer questions about the past. So who needs a CTMS? A CTMS can be useful to several kinds of organizations of various sizes, such as, again, pharmaceutical companies, contract research organizations or CROs, medical device companies, or academic institutions. But the common element across these different types of organizations is that they regularly manage multiple trials at the same time. Organizations in this situation often use several tracking tools to keep themselves organized, from paper logs to spreadsheets for contact names and addresses, patient visits, payments, investigational product, supplies, monitoring visits, and so on. And tracking this information in different places causes extra work and creates room for error. And it also makes it difficult to pull together reports both for internal review and for outside auditors. Plus, these tools are rather difficult to validate and keep validated. So for organizations that function like this, a CTMS can be a breath of fresh air and an investment that pays for itself through the efficiencies that it's going to enable. Let's discuss some key functions of a CTMS. A CTMS can support an extremely robust investigator and site database that enables complex tracking of individuals and organizations related to your trials. You can track information such as specialties, experience, patient demographics of doctors, as well as the facilities and equipment that are available at various clinics and institutions. In addition to investigators and hospitals and clinics, the contacts and accounts database should also allow you to track information about any person or organization that you may interact with on a clinical trial, such as lab technicians, pharmacists, and vendor contracts officers as contacts, as well as shipping and printing vendors or CROs as organizations. You can also track the performance of these people and places on your previous trials, and then you can query all of this data to streamline your site selection process or even aid in choosing a vendor for a specific service on a future trial. This feature enables you to pick the highest performing investigators and sites and vendors to ensure a smoother trial. So once you've selected your investigators and sites, you can use a CTMS to track things like essential documents and other site initiation tasks, to set up subject visit schedules, standard payment amounts, and so forth. So once the study is underway, the CTMS is used to track everything from site budgets to monitoring reports. For organizations without a centralized system, each of these bullets that you see on the slide is usually a separate spreadsheet, or at the very least a separate tab on one big spreadsheet. But with a CTMS, all of this information is consolidated and tracked in one place, which requires less work to maintain and enables real-time robust reporting. Also, with a CTMS, many of these processes can be at least partially automated with integrations to other systems, such as the clinical data management system for subjects and subject visit information, and a supplies tracking system for product supplies tracking information. One of the most useful aspects of a CTMS can be the enrollment statistics that it provides. You can easily learn how quickly specific sites are enrolling patients, which sites are consistently experiencing screen failures, which sites are completing subjects on schedule, and other related information. And you can actually cut that data any way you'd like, such as by country or by study. So you can get a full access to real-time enrollment statistics for the entire study. A CTMS also will streamline your document tracking process, which we know can be a large and costly component of every trial. A CTMS can help standardize the documents that must be collected from or sent to each site, even country-specific documents. And then this information can be queried to learn, for example, which medical licenses are expiring in the next 30 days, or how many documents are due today but have not yet been collected. A CTMS can also provide robust financial tracking for sites, countries, studies, projects, and individual primary investigators. And when you integrate that with an accounts payable system, the site payment process can be entirely automated, except for those steps where you want human intervention, of course, such as payment approvals. And finally, perhaps the most beneficial function of a CTMS is its reporting capabilities. Of course, the ability to track all this information is important, but if we can't get that information out of the system in a meaningful way, it's not that beneficial. And so when all of your trial data is maintained in a centralized database, the ability to find answers to all of your trial-related questions becomes much, much easier. And when you have real-time answers, you can make well-informed decisions that have real impact on your business. So now that we know more about what a CTMS can do and what sorts of organizations can benefit from one, let's talk a little bit about going about choosing the right system for your organization. The first step to any software selection process is to gather your requirements. And this can be done in a number of ways, such as analyzing your current processes and tools, reading the features and functionality lists of commercial systems, and talking with your colleagues at other organizations. Once you have a comprehensive, prioritized list that includes feedback from all stakeholders, you're ready to schedule demos. You may first want to look internally within your organization for cases where other departments or areas of your business may be utilizing applications that you can leverage before looking to external vendors for demos of systems. We had a situation where a company was looking to implement a CTMS across their multiple global business units, and each of their global business units were operating essentially as individual companies since they were acquired businesses. And when the global CTMS initiative was underway, they realized that one of their business units already had a robust CTMS in place. They evaluated that internal application and determined that it met their global needs, or with a few modifications, it'll meet their global needs. And they saved a significant amount in licensing and implementation costs by selecting an internal system. But if no internal tool or application exists or is in use, then reaching out to external vendors for demos is the next step. Each system that you consider should be evaluated against your prioritized list of requirements to ensure objective decision making. After each demo of a system, look at the requirements that the system did not meet and determine how critical these gaps are and whether they can be addressed within your budget through customization. So as you gather your requirements, you'll want to consider the various types of systems that exist and determine which one makes the most sense for your organization in terms of functionality, implementation time, and budget. A standard CTMS refers to a system that is used out of the box without any configurations or enhancements. Selecting a standard system can usually save you time, but you run the risk of not getting all the functionality that you need. Another option is to go with an accelerator, which is a standard system that has been pre-configured and packaged so it comes with several commonly requested configurations or enhancements. Accelerators are really designed to streamline and reduce the implementation time and cost for these solutions. So this can be a good choice for companies that need a robust system but don't have the budget or time for customizations. A customized CTMS is either a standard system or an accelerator that has been modified to meet your organization's specific needs. This option is definitely the best way to meet all of your organization's requirements, but it also tends to be the most expensive and time-consuming choice. A great way to reduce the time and cost of a customized CTMS is to start with an accelerator, again, that already meets many of your requirements. So once you've looked at your functionality requirements and your time and budget constraints, it should become clear which type of system would best meet your organization's needs, standard, accelerator, or customized. So once you've determined your best system type, you'll then want to consider the various implementation options available. And this is where requirements from your IT department become pretty critical. Depending on the size and capacity of your IT department, you might want to implement your CTMS completely on-site at your organization, or you might want to share at least some of that load with a hosting partner. With an in-house implementation, your organization buys all of the software licenses and necessary hardware and then stores and maintains that hardware on-site. This gives your organization complete control over and responsibility for the system, but it requires a great deal of knowledge, time, resources, and physical space from the organization. With a hosted implementation, the housing and maintenance of the hardware is handled by an external partner instead of the organization. So this reduces the organization's control a little bit, but it also relieves it from the burden of having knowledgeable on-site resources with the time to maintain the servers as well as the physical space to house them. And recently, hosting has been becoming increasingly popular, especially for smaller organizations that either don't have the capital to invest in a large in-house IT department or just choose not to. And these days, there are several different hosting solutions to choose from as well. Dedicated hosting is where your organization owns all the hardware and the software application, and the external data center is basically just housing and maintaining the servers. And at any time, you still have the ability to bring that hardware and software internally for a complete in-house setup. Shared hosting is where you own, or your organization owns, the software application, and you're essentially leasing the space on the hardware which your software is on, and the data center is maintaining it. So if an organization wants to bring that application in-house, they would just have to make a hardware purchase and bring in their application, which they own licenses to, onto their in-house hardware. Cloud computing, or software as a service, known as SaaS, assumes that in this scenario, the organization doesn't own the hardware or the software and is essentially leasing the service to be able to use the applications on demand. And as their user base or demands increase, they just increase their subscription accordingly with the external vendor. The organization doesn't incur any costs for hardware maintenance or replacements because they don't own anything in this scenario. They're simply just using the software as a service. So clearly, there are many things to consider during this selection process, and not just functionality. So here are some best practices to make sure you end up with exactly what you need. You want to start by identifying all of the stakeholder departments and a representative from each to collect feedback from his or her respective departments. Once you've gathered all that input, ensure everyone's needs are addressed by the list of requirements. Don't forget to consider both where you are today and where you plan to be in 2 to 5 years. You're going to want to have a system that can grow and support you as you grow as an organization. Next, don't limit your requirements to simply system functionality. You want to consider system types, hosting options, along with data migration and integration needs. Also include soft requirements such as vendor responsiveness, and the level of help desk support that's required by your organization. Finally, once you have a comprehensive list, you're going to need to prioritize it and get buy-in from all the stakeholders on that specific prioritization. Divide your requirements into must-haves and nice-to-haves, and then rank your nice-to-haves. Assign different weights to your nice-to-haves, and develop a scale such as 0 to 5, with 5 being meets the requirements exactly. So if you use a numerical system like this, you'll ensure objectivity and a system that truly meets your needs. Once you've selected your system and your implementation options, it's time to determine your implementation strategy. So for implementations that involve anything beyond using a system out of the box, there is always the question of big bang versus phased. The big bang approach is very enticing because it means you get everything you need all at once, but it also means a large upfront investment and also a long waiting period before your users actually get to use the system. Also, we found that once users actually begin using a system in their day-to-day lives, they usually discover additional requirements. And then the big bang approach generally depletes the budget for future enhancements, at least for a while, so the users have to wait longer for these additional requirements to be addressed. We had a few early adopters of the Siebel CTMS solution take on the big bang approach, in which they included significant application enhancements, data integration, data migration, and system automation components as well. The projects were pretty large projects, in some cases took approximately 2 years to deploy the initial phase. And since data integration, data integration and migration and some of these other components are dependent on the base application functionality, it ended up being like trying to hit a moving target in completing those aspects of the project, and led to multiple iterations and additional time. Also, once they deployed the systems and had the users use it for a few months, the users inevitably came up with additional requirements for enhancements, and that not only affected the base application configuration, but then they needed to update the integration, the interfaces as well in subsequent phases. So what we recommend is that you plan for a phased implementation. And this strategy allows the core critical business needs to be addressed in the initial phase quickly, and then requirements to be refined at the beginning of each subsequent phase based on the input from users that are now actually using the system. So, and this also allows for a stable system first, from which then to build integrations in a phase 2 or phase 3 scenario. And in addition to the flexibility this strategy provides, user feedback is generally more positive with this approach, as is user adoption, because new tools and new processes are easier to accept in smaller doses, smaller chunks. So the more quickly your users master this new system, the faster you can see the return on investment. But a phased approach alone is not going to guarantee success. There's a lot more work to be done well in advance of your go-live date to ensure a smooth transition to your new system. So prior to beginning your implementation, here are some steps that we recommend you take. Assemble your project team. Make sure you include representatives from all of the key stakeholder groups, including IT and each area of the business that will be affected by the new system. You want to determine who will lead the project, who will have the authority to make decisions, who will be part of the core team, who will be part of the extended team, and then decide how often the core and extended teams will meet and how much time in between meetings each member will be expected to work on that project. Then write all of this down in a project charter or project definition document and have the team formally agree to it. And for team members who are non-managers, consider having their managers approve their employees' time commitment to that project. Next, determine the tasks, deliverables, deadlines, and responsible resources. Be sure to include all of the tasks that we mentioned in these best practices and not just typical system development lifecycle or validation tasks. Next, create a scope control plan. We've seen this in the past. It's incredibly easy for a project scope to creep during an implementation, especially a long one. So it's very wise to come up with a strategy for handling that ahead of time. So putting in a formal process for requesting, reviewing, and approving scope changes, you're going to ensure that all of the downstream, you can ensure all the downstream effects are considered and only the business critical changes are accepted. Next, designing your communication plan. Consider all of the audiences of the project, the topics and level of detail each group is going to care about, the best method for reaching them, and the frequency which each group needs to be updated. Next, beginning your SOP gap analysis. So once you've selected your system, you should have enough information to begin analyzing your existing SOPs and identifying the gaps. And as I'm sure you'll all agree, the SOP review and approval process can be quite lengthy. So it's best to start working on this task as early as possible. And next, begin analyzing the organizational structure. With the introduction of a new system, the structure of the organization around it will most likely change. The best is to start considering these changes early so that you can identify the gaps and begin figuring out who will fill them. A key consideration for a CTMS implementation is how the administration tasks will be handled. Will it be centralized or decentralized? And we generally find that a centralized approach works pretty well, but it truly depends on the organization's culture and needs. So once you've created your formal plans for managing the project, stick with them. That way everyone involved in the project will know exactly what to expect and what is expected of them. But it's also wise to consider your communication plan as a living document so that you're able to make adjustments when you receive feedback that the communication is either too frequent or too infrequent, too high level, or too detailed. Once the project is underway, it's time to start designing your rollout, your training, and support plans. Are you going to be planning a release of the system to all the users at once? Are you going to pilot a single study first? Will you cut over mid-study, or will you maintain two systems simultaneously for a while? Once you determine your rollout plan, you can start formulating your training plan. If all the users are going to go live on the system at once, you'll need to plan for training all at once. If you're going to make the transition study by study, you're probably going to want to train one study team at a time. So once you determine who will be trained and when, you can decide which methods and materials are going to be most effective, again, based on your organizational culture and the characteristics of the user group. And incidentally, like I mentioned before, we are conducting an in-depth workshop on this topic at next month's CBI CTMS conference in Philadelphia, I think March 24th and 25th, along with one of our clients. And so this is going to be a 3-hour workshop on how to build an effective training program for CTMS. And if you want more information or are interested, please email me and I can get you some discounted registration rates for the conference. So next is your support plan. The post-go-live support plan should include multiple levels of support. And we often see clients use or identify a super user in each area of the business who serves as the first tier of support for the users in their respective area, followed by an in-house help desk, and then an external support service. But beyond identifying these tiers, the support plan should consider also how to maximize the help tools that are built into the system, as well as job aids and refresher training and other training documentation. So as you can see, the rollout and training and support plans are very much linked and interdependent. They require a lot of careful thought and consideration to support both the immediate needs and long-term success of the project. Another best practice related to user adoption is to involve the users early and often. Not only should they be involved in the selection process and the project team, but they should be involved in design workshops and document reviews and even test execution. Consider having a sandbox environment installed as early as possible for the users to sort of play in, with the caveat, of course, that development will be ongoing. Also plan on to have everyone who will be involved in test execution formally trained before the testing. And that's going to ensure a smoothing testing process and minimize anxiety in the testers. For example, if they don't know how to use the system and they struggle with the test steps, they may develop a negative view of the system and become resistant in adopting it. So the sooner the users are exposed to the system, the smoother the transition will be. And as you can imagine, implementation of a new system is probably a great time to review or possibly create a data standards document. This ensures that all users know how and in what format data should be entered in the system. This document should cover everything from what's entered in each line of the address record, the accepted and not accepted use of abbreviations, the accepted use and values for comments fields, to the format of a site number. We had scenarios in the past where a client implemented a system but didn't take the time to develop clear standards for data. And that led to things like addresses in the system that were 100 Main Street with street spelled out S-T-R-E-E-T, and then 100 Main Street as a street abbreviated with S-T period in the system. So multiple records that were essentially the same record just because we weren't following these data standards. And some users were using address line 2 for department name, address line 3 for suite number, and other users were using address line 3 for department name and address line 2 for suite number. So they were sort of switching it. So you can imagine that querying the application turned into a nightmare since the users didn't know which field to query for that specific information. So standardized data makes the querying of the data simpler and reporting of the data cleaner. And finally, prior to go live, it is incredibly helpful for a mandate to come from executive business resources, such as the project sponsors, that the CTMS must be used according to the release schedule. And then the use of legacy worksheets and logs has to be discontinued. This is probably one of the biggest reasons for low user adoption for new systems. If there's no clear directive that as of a certain date, old ways of tracking our trials should be discontinued, users will continue to use those old methods. But if it's clear that this is the expectation of everyone from senior leadership, user adoption typically doesn't become an issue. Okay, so I'll now open up the session for any questions you may have. And again, if you do have a question, the best method to use is the chat feature to submit your questions, and I'll address the questions as we receive them. So let me, we actually have some questions that have been entered, so I'll look at those right now. What features does Oracle Siebel CTMS add beyond the trial management capabilities integrated in Oracle Clinical? Trial management capabilities integrated in Oracle Clinical. So I'll try to address this question. I mean, maybe whoever submitted this can submit a follow-up. But I mean, Oracle Clinical is your clinical data management system. So all of your actual clinical data, your CRFs, your data on the CRFs is going to be housed in your Oracle Clinical system, your clinical data management. Your CTMS or your Siebel clinical system is all the metadata around your clinical trial. So tracking all of the activities, all of the investigators, the sites, what activities are happening, what's the progress of the trial, sort of the study management aspect and site management aspect of the trials, and that's what's captured in Siebel Clinical or a CTMS. And where the two sort of overlap or the integration, where it becomes sort of the likelihood of integration between the two is around the subject and subject visit activities. So as CRFs are being collected, as subjects are being enrolled and visits are being completed, those are key pieces of information that would tie in from your clinical data management system to your clinical trial management system and automatically complete those subject and subject visits, because your payments most likely to the investigator are tied to that subject and subject visit information. So that's where we've seen that integration between the two systems. All right, next question is, what is the typical size of a project team? So from a business perspective, typically, it depends on, how many different departments, how many different sort of business units you have that are represented. But typically, on the business side, you can see involvement from at least one or two representatives of key functions in the system. So a couple study managers, a couple CRAs, somebody from clinical finance, obviously somebody from IT, from an executive, clinical executive. So those are typical people that are going to be involved in sort of a core team scenario where they're providing the requirements from the business side. And the extended team is, not as involved as much, but they're sort of, the communications from the project team are taken from these core teams back to the extended team and vice versa. So requirements are being fed from the extended team to the core team. So on the business side, that's what the project team makeup looks like. From an implementation side, it really depends on, whether you're doing a standard implementation versus a customized or an accelerator. Obviously a customized implementation will see a larger project team for, a couple different, functional resources that'll focus on design and testing and training, and then development resources focused on the development and configuration and the installation portions of it, and project management, of course. So, these teams can range from 3, 4, 5 resources for, very, sort of standard or accelerator type of implementations. And we've seen teams, pretty large teams of, 20 plus on very, very complex implementations of CTMS solutions. Let's see. Do CTMS systems provide functionality down to the patient and clinical scheduling level and other site management activities? Absolutely. So site management activities, everything from creation of the site, tracking your site contacts, your site personnel, addresses, your site supplies, things that you're shipping out to the site, your site activities, site documents is a core function of a CTMS. So tracking all of your essential documents that you're sending to the site and receiving from site, and everything down to the patient level. So protocol deviations, subject visits, and even down to the procedures that are done on each of on each of those visits. So yes, all of that is typically housed within a CTMS. What is typically used for clinical research departments in hospitals? We haven't. I haven't come across. I haven't been involved in too many implementations that involve hospitals per se. But if there's clinical research, their trials typically run slightly differently than organizations such as pharmaceuticals or CROs. And they tend to use internal staff, internal investigators. There's a lot of investigator-initiated stuff as well that happens in those organizations. But I don't have a lot of information to provide around specifically what they typically use for clinical research departments in hospitals, unfortunately. But I know that they're Standard types of CTMS solutions that we see on the market, like the commercial systems, don't really lend themselves to hospital type of scenarios. In a phased approach, how do you determine the scope and priority of each phase? That's a great question. So in a phased approach, what typically happens is the beginning of your implementation, you're still gathering requirements. So before you prioritize your requirements, you still have a full listing of all of the requirements that your users want to meet with the CTMS. And so the prioritization step is really determining, what is going to get slated for each phase. So you're essentially on that step. That second step is essentially developing a CTMS roadmap for your organization. So that's really what the activity that takes place to determine what goes in each phase. And typically, what we see, like I said, recommendations is core functionality in phase 1, further enhancements and potentially integrations in phase 2, and then further sort of system automation in phase 3. You can sort of have a general look at how you should be phasing these requirements based on that. Okay, let's see. Have you seen RDC access managed through CTMS, as in approving users who should gain access to RDC trials? I'm sure there's probably some opportunities for integration within CTMS and specifically that feature, approving users who should gain access to RDC trials. But I haven't seen that done for that specific purpose. But we have, like I mentioned, we have seen integrations between multiple different, EDC vendors, electronic data capture vendors, RDC, and other EDC solutions that have integrated to CTMS solutions such as Siebel Clinical. So the integration between the two, like I mentioned, is largely focused on subject visit, and activity specifically. So that information specifically, and even protocol deviations, and in some cases adverse events. So those are some of the key areas that we've seen integrations between CTMS and integrations between CTMS and clinical data management or EDC solutions. Here's a question. It says you estimated a cost of approximately $1 million. What does this cost estimate include? I have to sort of be careful by saying typical implementations, because there's really no real typical implementation of a CTMS. I mean, they vary so much, but what we've seen for mid-sized to large organizations implementing, let's say, a Siebel Clinical and doing a customized Siebel Clinical implementation, what we've seen happen more often than not is a 9 to 12 month implementation with again, core functionality being the focus of the first phase. And utilizing an external implementation vendor, implementation costs can run on the upwards of $1 million or more. And that's really just to take something from sort of a base product, an out-of-the-box product, to addressing all of your core organization's requirements around CTMS. So again, that first phase of adding new fields, adding new views, screens, terminology, new modules to track specific things that your organization needs to track, taking that system from out of the box to that level, we've seen it take around $1 million, 9 to 12 months, and in some cases even more than that. Organizations that, particularly CRO organizations, where they have specific requirements that need to be met from a sponsor type of scenario, they end up spending a lot of money on those customizations. So that's where that sort of estimate comes from. But I mean, it ranges from anywhere from a few $100,000 to upwards of multi-million-dollar implementations. But now with the introduction of accelerators, there's accelerators in place that will reduce your implementation time down from 9 to 12 months down to 9 to 12 weeks of implementation, because these accelerators have already addressed a lot of the gaps in the base products and offer these accelerated solutions that reduce time and reduce cost. And even further, there's now again cloud computing and SaaS on-demand services that are in the market that we offer as well at BioPharm on demand. So accelerators on demand further reduce the implementation time and the cost for having a CTMS implementation done for your organization. Here's a question. We mentioned that adverse event tracking is potentially an aspect of a CTMS, and the question is, can CTMS take the place of a safety system? And our answer or recommendation would be no. You don't want to overextend your CTMS solution to. It's not going to do what a safety system like Argus is going to do for safety reporting and tracking. The only aspects of safety tracking that we do within the system, or we typically either customize or as part of our accelerator, is purely for monitoring and reconciliation purposes. So clients typically have the need to, from a monitoring perspective, when their monitor goes out to the site, how many adverse events are on file and sort of basic information about them around when they were identified and when they were sent to safety, et cetera. So just from a monitoring perspective, you can utilize your CTMS to track that information, but it's certainly not meant to be a safety system like Argus. But there are areas and there are opportunities to integrate the CTMS solution with a safety system, and we're actually working on a couple of those right now. So you can actually, again, for reconciliation purposes, you can tie your monitored adverse events in CTMS with the actual safety case records within Argus. So that's another opportunity for integration. Do CTMS applications need to be validated? That's a great question. So we've seen a variety of this. I think I would probably say that the vast majority of clients do validate their CTMS at some level. So again, they take a risk-based approach depending on how they're going to be utilizing their CTMS, and they sort of identify the risk areas of the application and choose to validate portions of the CTMS, those portions of the CTMS. And other organizations validate fully validate the entire system. While we've also seen a few organizations not validate the CTMS system. So it's really an organizational-driven topic, whether they choose to validate the CTMS that they're implementing. On our side, we recommend validation, and we actually provide all the tools for validation. So, particularly with our accelerator, we have developed all the assets for if we wanted to implement that at an organization on premise. Then we have all the validation tools and validation assets and validation suite to fully validate the application in that in-house setup or even on an on-demand setup. So. Again, from a vendor perspective, we have to be ready for sort of, different organizations that have a varying definition of whether their CTMS needs to be validated. So we take a more conservative approach with validation to the CTMS. But again, it's usually a client-driven or a company-driven task to do that risk analysis and determine whether their applications need to be validated. Here's a question on are there project management features with Gantt chart, budget, resource scheduling, etc., integrated with CTMS, or do you find people needing MS Project or Oracle Project collaboration in addition? There are some tools in Siebel Clinical specifically that talk to sort of project management. There's abilities to import MS Project plans directly into the application and sort of manage it that way. There's integration sort of built in for that. There are resource scheduling and resource management modules within Siebel as well. And I'll explain those a little bit, where you can actually build out your organization, give each of your employees skills and experience within the tool, and then when you have a project, up and coming study, the system can actually recommend who's available and who has the skill set to fill a certain resource requirement on a particular study. But you can imagine that's something that it is robust, but you have to prime it, right? You have to put all of that data in there first to be able to use it. And two, only larger organizations really typically utilize features like that. So if you're looking for a CRA that has certain skills that is in the West Coast, for example, for an up-and-coming study, the system can sort of find you candidates that will fill that need if you've fed that information to the system. So Siebel has that ability to do that, but we only found very, very sort of large organizations utilize features like that, within Siebel. Sort of the smaller, clinical operations groups tend to be pretty small, if we're not talking about contract research organizations. So we haven't seen that feature utilized very heavily, and plus, organizations typically have, project management tools in place, for doing those types of things outside of the system. But there's certainly room for integration, like I mentioned, with MS Project, that you can import and integrate an MS Project directly into Siebel. And I'm sure some other CTMS solutions have some similar functionality. Somebody asked a question, will we be seeing a demo? Unfortunately not. We don't have time for a demo on the 1-hour webinar, but if you'd certainly like to see a demo, you can certainly reach out to us, and we'd be happy to coordinate something to schedule a demo of either Siebel Clinical or our Ascend Accelerator product. Another question, is there mail merge capability within the CTMS to send correspondence to study site contacts? The answer is yes. So Siebel Clinical does have a mail merge function. It actually, so it's had a mail merge function for quite some time within the application. There's a document administration capability where you can upload templates and then utilize your correspondence module, and that's what they call it. So you can select individual investigators or multiple investigators, and then generate a mail merge document with those recipients. And what it does is it generates the merged document as a Word file, and then you can certainly print that out and send it via snail mail or email those documents. It also has the ability to do sending email directly from the system, so you can integrate it with your Outlook, and you can have email templates that are embedded in the system. And then again, you can select the recipients and then select the body of the text from a template, and then it'll send out those emails. So there is some capability like that within CTMS. It does take a little while to get that sort of set up properly, but certainly that capability is there. And even the correspondence module has been around in Siebel for multiple versions of Siebel, and the latest version, 8.1, it also comes with a reporting tool called BI Publisher, and that also can be utilized to do. It's essentially a reporting tool that's embedded within Siebel, but it can certainly be used in a mail merge type capacity as well, where you generate it's almost like generating a report, but essentially you have your mail merge templates in a report format, and it would pull in the relevant details from your application to merge it with those fields, and again generate a merge document for you to then manipulate and send to your site contacts. So I think we've hit at least most of the questions, and we're running out of time here, so I'll have to wrap it up. But I did want to thank you all for sharing this time with us, and I hope you found it was time well spent. Like I mentioned, we are taking March off due to the CTMS conference in Philadelphia. Again, that's March 24th and 25th in Philadelphia, the CBI CTMS conference, and we're going to be delivering a co-presenting with one of our clients, Covidian, on building an effective CTMS training program. And we encourage all of you to attend. And if you would like some reduced rates on registration, feel free to email us, and we'll be happy to give you some vouchers for some reduced registration. I do want to mention we have the additional webinars planned for April and May, so if you haven't registered yet, please go ahead and register. In April, we're going to be doing a condensed version of that training workshop, and in May, we're going to be talking about post-go-live best practices for Siebel Clinical, such as data standards and maximizing the value of templates. So definitely register for those. And again, this webinar is going to be available for download from our website within 24 hours. So for those of you or colleagues that may have missed it, you want to route them to all of the webinars that we do are going to be recorded and are available on our website at biopharm.com. And again, for demos and other things, those also can be requested on our website as well. So if you have any requests for demos, feel free to request that from the webinar as well. And if you have any additional questions or you want to discuss any of your organization's needs and determine the best options, feel free to contact me directly. My email address is on the screen. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Please stand by.